My name is Lena Hart, and if you had met me 5 years ago, you would have said I was the quiet type, steady job, steady life, steady dreams. I grew up in Cedar Falls, a small American town where the houses sat close, the neighbors waved at every passing car, and gossip moved faster than the wind. Everyone there knew my parents, Martin and Clara, long before they ever knew me. To most people, we looked like an ordinary American family. My mother baked pies for church events. My father talked too loudly about politics at the diner. And me? I was the girl who worked too hard and saved too much. At least, that's how everyone described me. For years, I kept my head down and focused on surviving. In the mornings, I worked as a receptionist at the local clinic, answering phones, scheduling appointments, and reassuring worried patients that their results would arrive soon. In the evenings, I logged into my laptop and handled bookkeeping for small businesses scattered across different states. I learned to stretch a dollar until it thinned like paper. I didn't take vacations. I didn't buy new clothes unless something had a tear I couldn't fix. When friends posted their pictures from Europe, London bridges, Paris cafes, or train rides through the Italian countryside, I double-checked my spreadsheets instead. Every dollar I saved mattered. By the time I turned 30, I had something I once thought impossible, a little over $210,000 saved. The number felt unreal, like a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. For the first time in my life, I could imagine a future that belonged to me. I pictured a small house with a porch swing, a kitchen window where morning sun could spill across my coffee mug, and maybe even a dog curled up by the door. It wasn't a big dream, but it was mine. Then my parents came to me with their own dream. It was a Wednesday evening, one of those quiet nights when the house smelled like lemon cleaner and my mother was humming in the kitchen. We sat at the old wooden dining table that had been in our family since before I was born. My mother slid a thick folder across the surface, her eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "Lena," she began gently, "we found a piece of land on Willow Street, over by the old apple orchard. It's beautiful, and we were thinking, if you use your savings to build a house there, we could all live together. We're getting older, honey. This way we stay close." My father leaned back in his chair and nodded. "It'll be a house for all of us, your mother, me, and you. You're better at paperwork anyway. Just put everything in your name first. Later, when things settle, we can switch it over." "It's just for convenience," he said. Later, the way someone might say someday, like it didn't matter when or how. Their request hit me like a warm, heavy blanket. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to run from the idea. I had finally reached a place where independence wasn't a fantasy, but a real possibility. I had dreamed of my own home for so long. Not a shared one or a family one, my home. But another part of me, the part that had always felt indebted to them, whispered, "This is what a good daughter does." My parents had helped me through difficult times, especially my mother, who once worked overtime shifts just to cover a dentist bill I could not afford back then. My father had fixed my car more times than I could count. They had fed me, housed me, raised me. I felt guilty even hesitating. So, I pushed down the small voice inside me that said something was off, and I told him yes. The next week, I met with the builder they recommended. His name was Daniel Price, a calm, methodical man who spoke in short sentences and carried a clipboard everywhere. He walked me through the construction plan, foundation work, framing, roofing, insulation, and paint. The full build was estimated at $200,000, not including furniture or final touches. I nodded through the entire meeting, though the number made my chest tighten. When it came time to wire the first $50,000, my hands shook so violently I had to steady them on the counter. I stared at the banking screen, seeing half my savings disappear in one click. But then I remembered the smiles on my parents' faces, the excitement in my mother's voice, the proud way my father had told everyone at the diner that his daughter was building a house for the family. Their happiness made the fear easier to swallow. I told myself it was worth it. The land was technically theirs. They had bought the small plot years ago and never used it. The money was mine. And the contract, at their suggestion, went in my name. At the time, this felt like trust. Like we were a team. Partners. That's the word my father used when he handed me the pen to sign. I didn't see then that trust was not the same thing as ownership. Construction moved quickly. Every few days, I visited the site, watching beams rise from dirt, watching walls come together like pieces of a life I had imagined since childhood. The builder updated me regularly, and every change, every upgrade, bigger windows, wider dining room, improved garage, somehow became my responsibility to pay for. Still, I paid. Because I thought family meant helping without question. I thought love meant giving until it hurt. I thought loyalty meant silence. But the truth was growing quietly behind every new board, every fresh coat of paint. A truth I refused to acknowledge. I believed we were building a home together. My parents believed I was paying for theirs. I should have seen the signs, the way they talked about the future as though my place in it was optional, the way they referred to the house as theirs when talking to neighbors, the way they made decisions without asking me. I pushed every warning aside because I feared what it would mean to confront it. I feared hearing the truth out loud. But the truth was already forming, like a storm building in the distance. I didn't know it then, but this house, the one I broke myself to build, would become the center of the biggest fight of my life. I didn't know it would cost me more than money. It would cost me the version of myself that kept bending until I finally broke. And I certainly didn't know that what began as a family dream would end with 5 police officers standing outside my door, reminding my parents that the house they tried to claim had never legally been theirs. But that part comes later. This, right here, was where the cracks first appeared. Construction began in the warm stretch of early summer, when Willow Street smelled like fresh-cut grass, and every sunrise carried a hopeful glow. I remember the first day the workers arrived, trucks rumbling up the dirt path, men unloading planks of wood, metal beams, and tools that clattered against the ground with purpose. It felt like watching a dream take physical shape. My dream. Or, at least, that's what I believed in those early days. Every evening after work, I drove straight to the construction site. I would park across the road, step out onto the dusty ground, and just stand there, imagining rooms, hallways, and moments that hadn't happened yet. Daniel Price, the builder, always greeted me in the same calm way, clipboard in hand and sawdust clinging to his boots. "Frames in," he said one afternoon, nodding toward the half-formed skeleton of what would become the living room. "You're getting your money's worth, Lena." I smiled politely, though the words, "your money's worth," always hit me with mixed feelings. The house was in my name, under my payments, built with my savings. Yet every decision seemed to belong to my parents. The lines were already blurring, and I ignored the uneasy tug in my chest. I tried to choose simple designs. White walls, wide windows, and a gray roof, clean, bright, and modest. I never wanted anything grand, just a home that felt warm, airy, and peaceful. But every time I visited, my parents were there with new demands. "We should make the dining room bigger," my mother insisted one day, standing with her hands on her hips like she was leading the project. "Imagine holidays here. Thanksgiving dinners. Birthdays. We need more space for guests." "We don't have guests," I reminded her softly. "We will," she replied sharply. "This is our house too, Lena. We need to think ahead." Each time she said our, something inside me twisted. Then there was my father, who rarely contributed to conversations until he saw something he wanted. He stood near the foundation of what would have been a normal-sized garage, shaking his head in disapproval. "I want enough room for my old car," he told Daniel. "And space for tools." Daniel, who always stayed neutral, said, "That'll add about $7,000. My father turned to me, as if it never occurred to him that he should be the one paying. "You can manage that, can't you?" I nodded, even though inside, my stomach tightened into a knot. I added the amount mentally, then added it again, as if checking it twice would make it hurt less. The total build cost slowly climbed to $215,000, and every increase came from a choice that wasn't mine. Each night, I lay awake doing calculations that made my heart pound painfully. After paying for furniture, appliances, curtains, dishes, and a dozen small things a house needs, I would be left with maybe $5,000 in my account. Years of juggling 2 jobs, denying myself vacations, skipping dinners out with friends, and holding on to clothes long after they needed replacing. It all vanished into this house. But I kept telling myself it wasn't really gone. It had simply transformed into walls and beams and floors. Into a future. And when the house finally came together, it truly did look like something out of a little American dream. A 2-story white house with blue shutters, a porch with a sturdy wooden swing, and a narrow walkway that curved gracefully toward the road. When I saw the final paint drying in the morning light, I felt a wave of emotion rise in my chest, pride, exhaustion, fear, hope, all tangled together. We moved in on a bright Sunday morning. The sunlight hit the porch railings in just the right way, making them gleam like polished bone. My father carried a box labeled kitchen, laughing loudly as he walked through the doorway. My mother, of course, had already taken a dozen pictures before even setting foot inside. She posted them online with a caption, "Our new family home. So blessed." The word "our" flashed in my mind again, but I pushed it away. That first night, as I sat on the porch swing with my legs curled under me, I listened to the crickets and thought maybe, just maybe, I had done the right thing. Despite the cost, despite the discomfort, despite the quiet voice inside me that had been whispering warnings, I convinced myself that this was worth it. I had built a house. I had built something real, something permanent. But while I celebrated the moment, I didn't know the storm brewing behind closed doors. Because while I thought we were settling into our new lives, my parents were already working in the shadows. Months later, I would learn they had spoken to a lawyer in a nearby city called Pine Grove, telling him they wanted to arrange the house so that it would reflect their contributions. Except they hadn't contributed money, only opinions, demands, and expectations. They tried to start the ownership transfer process behind my back. They told the lawyer they were the rightful owners, and I was simply keeping the house in my name for temporary reasons. They even attempted to gather documents to support this story. But things did not go smoothly for them. The transfer stalled because the lawyer needed tax forms they didn't have, signatures they couldn't fake, and proof they couldn't provide. They needed receipts, bank statements, and official papers, all of which existed under my name, not theirs. At the time, I had no idea any of this was happening. I was living in the house, paying for all the utilities, working long hours, decorating rooms piece by piece. My parents walked around the place like they owned every inch of it, criticizing my furniture choices, replacing things without asking, and inviting people over without telling me. But I still didn't see the full picture. Or maybe I saw parts of it and refused to believe them. Because believing would have meant admitting that the two people I trusted most were preparing to push me out of the home I paid for. It wasn't until much later, when everything exploded, that I realized the truth. They never saw the house as mine. They saw it as theirs from the moment the first nail was hammered into the frame. But the contract, signed in my name with my money, under my legal ownership, stayed exactly where it was. That small detail, the one they thought they could fix later, would end up being the only reason I still had a home when everything fell apart. And without knowing it, the papers locked in my desk drawer had already begun saving me from the disaster my parents were quietly building behind my back. It happened on a Wednesday morning, one of those quiet, warm mornings in Cedar Falls where the sunlight slips softly through the kitchen window and nothing feels threatening. I remember humming to myself as the coffee maker clicked and gurgled, filling the air with the familiar smell that usually comforted me. But that morning, before I could even take my first sip, everything I believed about my family cracked open. My mother walked into the kitchen with a look I had never seen before. Not the tight smile she used when she was annoyed, not the cold stare she used when she was disappointed. No, this was something sharper, almost like she'd made a final decision long before she ever spoke it out loud. She crossed her arms and planted her feet, like she was preparing for battle. "Lena," she said, her voice clipped and sharp.
"We've talked about this.
It's time you moved out." I blinked at her, stunned. "Move out of where?" I asked, forcing out a confused laugh. "My own house." I expected her to laugh with me, to break the tension and tell me she was joking or exaggerating. But before she could say another word, my father walked in behind her. He didn't laugh. He didn't smile. His face was cold and serious, as if he had rehearsed this moment. "This house is ours," he said, his tone heavy with authority. "We're your parents. We gave you everything. You built it for us, Lena. You're an adult now. You can rent a place in town. There's a small flat on Oak Street for $900 a month." We checked. The words hit me like someone had ripped the ground from beneath my feet. Suddenly, the air felt thinner. My heart drummed painfully against my ribs. "I paid for this house," I whispered. My voice shook despite my efforts to steady it. "Every dollar. The contract is in my name. This is my home." My mother scoffed and waved her hand dismissively, as though my claim was nothing more than a childish complaint. "That was just for the bank, sweetheart. Everyone knows this is the family home. You are being selfish. Pack your things. You have until the end of the week." Her voice had a rehearsed tone, like she'd been practicing those words for days. I felt a burn rise in my chest, part anger, part heartbreak. "Selfish," I repeated. "I spent everything I had on this place. I worked 2 jobs. My father cut me off, his voice rising. Remember, we let you live here.
Don't forget that.
We can change the locks if we want." The threat hit harder than any insult. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled so badly that I had to steady myself on the counter. They weren't just trying to claim the house, they were trying to erase me from it. I backed away from them, unable to process the weight of their words. I walked out the front door and sank onto the porch swing. The world spun around me. The house I paid for, the house I built, the house I thought represented a future with my family, was now being used to push me out. My phone buzzed in my hand, but I didn't look at it. Instead, I closed my eyes and tried to remember something my lawyer, Phoebe Grant, had told me months earlier when we finalized the paperwork. "Keep copies of everything. If anyone ever tries to claim your property, call me or call the police. This house is legally yours, Lena. Don't let anyone push you out." Her voice echoed in my head like a beacon cutting through fog. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice trembled, but the words came out strong enough to be understood. "My name is Lena Hart. I own the house at 14 Willow Street. My parents are trying to force me out of my own home. The deed is in my name. I feel unsafe, and I need help." The dispatcher calmly asked for details, my name, the situation, and whether I had proof of ownership. I told her everything. I said the deed and the bank records were in a folder right by the door. "Officers are on their way," she said. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes that felt like a lifetime. Then I saw the flashing lights, 2 police cars, and an SUV pulling up along the curb. 5 officers stepped out. Neighbors peeked through blinds and cracked open screen doors, drawn by the sudden commotion. The lead officer, a woman with dark hair pulled into a tight braid, approached me. Her name tag read Officer Maya Reyes. "Are you Lena?" she asked. "Yes," I said, standing up. "This is my house." Officer Reyes nodded. "Let's go inside and talk to your parents." My heart raced as we entered the house. My parents stood in the living room, looking shocked and offended, as though they were the ones betrayed. "What is all this?" my mother cried out. "We are her parents." Officer Reyes lifted a hand calmly. "Ma'am, we're here because there's a property dispute. We need to see proof of ownership." With shaking hands, I opened the folder on the hallway table. The deed lay at the top, crisp and official, with my full name, Lena Rose Hart. I showed them the contract, the payment receipts, everything. Officer Reyes studied each paper carefully, her expression tightening with every line she read. When she finally looked up, her voice carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Based on this documentation," she said firmly, "Miss Hart is the legal owner of this property. The 2 of you are guests here, not owners." My father's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is nonsense," he barked. "She built this for us." Another officer stepped forward. "Sir, the law cares about documents, not assumptions. You cannot force your daughter out of a property she legally owns." What happened next unfolded so quickly, I barely kept up. My father continued arguing, louder, more aggressively. When he tried to push past one of the officers, they ordered him to calm down. He didn't. He called the situation a joke and insisted the police were making a mistake. That was it. Officer Reyes instructed them to pack a few essential items. When my mother refused and shouted that she wasn't going anywhere, the officers began to remove their belongings, bags, boxes, small furniture, placing them carefully but firmly outside in the yard. I stood there, frozen, watching shirts, old photo albums, shoes, and my father's beloved armchair being carried past me. My mother shouted that I had ruined the family. My father muttered that I was ungrateful and heartless. But the deed sat on the hallway table behind me, like a shield I never realized I'd need. As the officers walked my parents outside, Officer Reyes turned to me and said in a quiet voice, "You did the right thing calling us. You're safe." For the first time in my life, the law stood on my side, even against the two people I thought would always protect me. And as the door closed behind them, I felt the weight of something breaking inside me, something old, something painful, something I had never dared face until that moment. The house felt impossibly quiet after the police left. Not peaceful, just hollow, like the walls were trying to understand what had happened. My parents had taken only what the officers insisted they take, some clothes, a few boxes, and whatever personal items they could gather in 10 tense minutes. I later heard they were living with a cousin in a nearby American city called Riverbend, paying $600 a month for a cramped apartment. But that day, all I could think about was the empty living room and the echo of their voices fading into silence. That night, I lay on the couch and stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel proud. If anything, I felt like a person who had watched her entire past get carried out the front door. The memories, good and bad, were tangled together, and losing them all at once left a strange ache behind. But woven into that ache was something else, too, something quiet and unfamiliar. Space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space that belonged only to me for the first time in my life. The next week, I called a locksmith named Greg Walters, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a dusty toolbox. He replaced the locks in under half an hour, charging me $120. As he worked, he said gently, "You're doing the right thing. A house isn't just wood and walls.
It's respect.
It's boundaries." His words stayed with me long after he left, sinking in slowly, like rain into dry soil. When the house was finally secured, I walked through every room with careful steps, as though I was entering a place I hadn't seen before. In many ways, The big dining room, something my mother had insisted on, felt too large now. The expanded garage, something my father had demanded, felt too empty. Even the porch swing, which I once imagined us enjoying together, seemed like a reminder of promises that had been twisted into expectations. All of it had been shaped by them, but paid for by me. Now, each room felt as though it was asking who it truly belonged to. The next day, I called my lawyer, Phoebe. She guided me through every detail, securing the deed, updating tax documents, and ensuring no one could contest ownership again. Every stamp, every signature, every confirmation brought me a little closer to reclaiming the life I nearly lost. When it was all complete, I printed a small copy of the deed, framed it, and hung it by the front door. At first, it felt silly. Who frames legal paperwork? But the longer it stayed there, the more it felt like a badge of survival. It wasn't just paper. It represented every late-night shift, every dollar saved, every part of myself I had sacrificed to build the life I deserved. Months went by before I saw my parents again. We met in a quiet cafe in a city called Lakewood, far enough from Cedar Falls that no one would gossip. My mother spoke first. "We didn't think you'd actually call the police," she said, stirring her tea with slow, shaky movements. I took a steady breath. "You didn't think I'd ever say no." My father stared at his coffee for a long moment before saying, "We thought you owed us." I nodded, not with agreement, but understanding of the root of everything. "I do owe you," I said softly. "And I've spent years thanking you, helping you, supporting you. But trying to force me out of a house I paid for, that wasn't love. That was control. The conversation lasted 2 hours. No shouting. No explosions. Just old wounds being acknowledged, some apologies that came too late, and the slow rebuilding of boundaries I had never been allowed to have before. I left knowing things would never return to what they had been. But maybe that was the point. When I returned home to Willow Street, the porch swing creaked as I sat down. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting soft orange light across the yard. I wrapped my hands around the chains of the swing and breathed deeply. For the first time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt like mine. I started saving money again, not as fast as before, but enough to imagine a future. Maybe someday I would visit Europe, stay in a tiny hotel, and explore cities with old cobblestone streets. Maybe I would finally live a life that didn't revolve around pleasing anyone but myself. But even if that dream waited, I already had something better. I had a white house with blue shutters. A deed hanging by the front door with my name on it. A home built not just from money, but from the moment I finally chose myself. Whenever friends asked about the house, I told them the whole story. The $200,000, the police officers, the betrayal, and the decision that saved me. And every time I finished, I touched the doorframe gently and thought, this is my home. Not because I built it, but because I claimed my place in my own life at last.